This episode is brought to you by the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook, the first beautifully designed, fully customizable paper charting workbook designed with you in mind. With 3 years worth of charting pages, the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook has you covered. If you've been looking for a solid alternative to charting apps, you'll love this charting workbook. The FAM Charting Workbook is available in both Fahrenheit and Celsius editions and is available in spiral-bound, paperback, and ebook versions. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/workbook to order your copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/workbook. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 457. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with over 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormone health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I have been consistently outspoken about hormonal birth control over the past 2 decades and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I teach women's health professionals how to utilize the menstrual cycle as a vital sign in their practices, and I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys and a brand new baby girl. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with me today. Today I'm sharing my interview with Kaely McDevitt, and we get into a really important, interesting topic. We're talking about undereating, how it pertains to weight loss, and how weight loss goals and fertility goals work together. And what's interesting is that over the years of working with women and with menstrual cycles behind the scenes, I've seen just a very clear trend emerge where I think I can say the majority, or at least a significant subset of my clients, tend to fall into the category of unintentional overeating, or unintentional undereating. So not necessarily trying to undereat, but I think as women, there's a lot of different factors that work together to lead us to eat less than is optimal in a variety of different situations. And one good example of that right off kind of the top of my head is the example of weight loss and how women's bodies are perceived in this world that we're living in. Often as women, we're trying to make ourselves smaller. We're trying to lose weight. We're trying to get leaner. We're trying to get slimmer. And it doesn't occur to most of the women that I've worked with over the years that if we are upping our activity level and exercising a whole bunch, that we may actually need to eat more food because of the 80s and 90s with the focus on weight loss and cutting calories, so eating less and working out more as for the goal of weight loss. And what's interesting when you're looking at the menstrual cycle as a vital sign is that when you do that, you notice how it throws off your hormones pretty much right away. And so the menstrual cycle is a really interesting marker to keep us grounded, to make sure that our actions are matching up to our goals as far as menstrual cycle health, hormone health, fertility, whatever it is that your goals are. So before we jump into today's episode, let me tell you a little bit about Kaely. Kaely McDevitt is a registered dietitian specializing in women's health. She owns a virtual practice where she and her team help their clients overcome hormone and digestive issues through personalized nutrition. Having experienced the pitfalls of a conventional approach to women's health firsthand, Kaely is passionate about empowering women to take the driver's seat over their health and well-being. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode. So I'm excited to be here today with Kaely. Welcome to the show.
Oh, I'm excited to be here too. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I'm excited, and I'm really excited about the topics we're going to jump into. So before we really delve into metabolism and burnout, which I'm really excited to talk about, let us know, how did you get into women's health space. Let us know what made you choose this type of work.
For sure. I feel like I'll just end up giving you my hormone health story because that's really what happened. So I'm a registered dietitian, and I went into school in this track thinking I would be in sports nutrition. Like, I was an athlete in high school. I just always had an interest in sports nutrition. So I picked my internship because it had elective rotations in the sports nutrition space. And ironically, during that time, I was dealing with a whole host of hormone health issues. So I went on birth control like almost immediately after I got my period in high school because they were miserable. I didn't go on to do it for birth control reasons, but really to just try to manage the symptoms that I was having. I was missing school days each month. It was not fun. And by the time I was in school to become a dietitian, I had tried probably every birth control pill that was on the market because I really, to summarize how I felt, I just didn't feel like me when I was on it. So I would go see my OBGYN. I'd be like, hey, here's how I'm feeling. Is there something else I can try? And we'd switch to a slightly different formulation. I think I bounced through all of them. And largely my symptoms were ignored, or I was told that it wasn't from birth control and that it must be from something else. And then I was, about 7 years into schooling in a health space and realized how little I knew about cycles and how the body worked. And I didn't know how birth control worked, and I had been taking it for like nearly 10 years at that point. So I took myself off birth control, navigated a pretty bumpy post-birth control syndrome space for about the span of a year. And in that process was just diving into all the information I could find. That's how I came across your work. And I was so thankful that it was there because there wasn't much stuff being talked about, and really learned how to understand my body and my cycle, how to support and optimize it, and really felt like I got back to myself. So I started chronicling this in a blog because the jobs I had at the time were definitely not in the women's health space. So I'm like putting myself out there on the internet, talking about periods. It's like my mom and 4 people from high school that are following my blog. And I slowly started to realize how many people were looking for that info. And it was resonating a lot with friends and family and friends of friends. And then kind of over time, I just naturally moved into this space because it was something I was so personally connected to and passionate about making available, and moved away from where I thought I was going to be in sports nutrition and just doubled down on the women's health and really haven't looked back. And I love this work, love being in this space, and love being part of this team of people trying to put information out there that unfortunately we didn't get in health class, but we can get it now. So that's how we got here.
Well, thanks for sharing. I love how that intro question always takes us through like a decade or more of someone's life.
It's a lot of years.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the listeners, if not all, are going to resonate with your story on some level. It's one of those things where learning about fertility awareness and the cycle and how the cycle is connected to health is so fundamental. Once you learn about it, it's like, well, duh. But very few of us have the opportunity to learn that in school. And so you've probably already gathered that one of the things that I feel strongly about, if we just sit around and wait until whoever it is supposed to tell us in our school system or whatever, then we'll just keep waiting. So it really is up to women to just take up the reins and just start disseminating information and supporting each other. And isn't it ironic? You're a professional in your field and you still had to learn about this separately from your education. Maybe just speak to that briefly, because I think it's, I feel like this is one of the challenges for yourself as a woman who's a professional, because you have to sort out your own stuff too. But it's also a challenge for women seeking support, even from professional women, because even if it's a holistic type field like nutrition, it doesn't mean that all of the practitioners are trained in this way.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I remember being really angry about this fact. To become a dietitian is a 4-year bachelor's, a year-long clinical internship, and I did go on and get my master's. So this is a lot of years in a health field, mind you. So like lots of anatomy and physiology, lots of time to cover this stuff. And I was like, how is it possible that we didn't even do like a brief overview of what's happening here, let alone how nutrition can influence the menstrual cycle? So, and I was thinking to myself, man, if I went through all this time in school studying something that not a ton of people study and I didn't get exposed to it, by no means is anybody else getting exposed to this information in their schooling either. So I felt a lot of anger about that initially. And then I also felt a lot of like inadequacy as a professional, that I was applying what I was being taught in school and I couldn't help myself. And I'm, near graduating, ready to start taking clients of my own. And I'm like, how can I be expected to help people if I'm having a hard time helping myself? And I'm sure we'll talk about this later on in our interview, but just like desperately trying to manipulate nutrition to support my health versus like flipping the way I viewed that and really looking at nutrition as a way of supporting my body instead of manipulating things. So there was a huge disconnect between how I saw nutrition, my lack of understanding of women's health fundamentally, and where those things get married together. And I just came out of school feeling completely inadequate in my schooling in that area. And so had to take it upon myself to learn it. And like you said, it's an individual thing. I wish this was taught, and, it's my life's mission to make sure that that changes. But in the meantime, we do have to take it upon ourselves to learn what wasn't taught so that we can have control over that and feel like ourselves day to day and have optimal fertility.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I'm really glad that we took a bit of time on that point, because it's challenging then on both sides. It's challenging for you as a women's health professional to sort out these issues, but it's also challenging for the woman who's not a women's health professional to find someone who can support her, because you can get all the love and support, but without some of those pieces of knowledge about the cycle and how nutrition can support it, then you can end up doing a lot of stuff and spending a lot of money with professionals, but not getting the results. And this is something that obviously is a huge thing that comes out on the podcast and that I see in my client work and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a big topic, but I don't even know what to say. We have to be kind of realistic about that when seeking support for a cycle. So anyways, your experience though brought you into this because it showed you how critical it is. Yep. So, I mean, I feel like I'm tempted to like ask more, but maybe, so we're going to move forward, but one more question around your own personal experience, which is maybe just share with us just as kind of a summary of some of the things that you actually did because you mentioned post-birth control kind of syndrome. So I don't always use that language. I mean, that's the language that everybody uses, so everyone's familiar with it. I tend to refer to it as the like post-birth control transition phase, because it's the same thing. But maybe share with us what are some of the things that you did that actually worked that might have been different to what you would have thought based on your training that actually helped you to kind of get everything back on track.
Yeah, for sure. So I happened to find a very interesting first job out of school, and it was for a startup corporate wellness company back when I was living in California. And one of the unique things that job did is we did corporate screenings using functional lab testing. So it was like a mind-blowing thing to see testing outside of what I was learning in a clinical setting. And a lot of it was centered around what was going on in the gut and what was going on with nutrient status. So I had transitioned off birth control very recently. I'm like kind of tiptoeing into this space, and I get an opportunity to do this lab work on myself. And going into it, I'm like, I'm the vision of health. I'm following all the nutrition guidelines I was taught in school. I'm super aware of exactly how many calories I'm getting. I'm staying away from really rich stuff because this is what I was being taught even, just 10 years ago. And I did this micronutrient test on myself. And I kid you not, it was the worst result I've ever seen of all like thousands of clients that I had helped at that point. I was like widespread deficiencies everywhere. And I was like, how is this possible? I'm following all of this advice. Like, I feel okay. I feel generally pretty good. What's the deal? And that was part of my like unlearning of a lot of conventional nutrition advice and getting back to like, no, I just need to be focusing on real food and getting away from like the calorie concept that was really driven home for us in school and focusing on like, it's okay if this food has more fats, and actually that's going to be helpful from an absorption standpoint. So it completely transitioned my diet away from looking at what I thought was healthy to like more of an ancestral approach to eating and incorporating a wider variety of nutrient dense foods, incorporating things like organ meats and stuff that I literally never in my life had been exposed to, and really just completely changed my outlook on nutrition because I had seen lab data to prove that what I was doing was actually not supporting me internally. And of course, I was looking at some of the research that was out there about nutrients depleted from hormonal contraceptives, and it was a pretty good match with the results I was seeing too. So I really increased the amount of food that I was eating and the variety and nutrient density of it. I scaled way back on the type of exercise that I was doing. At the time, I was like an avid distance runner too. So the picture of burnout was pretty strong, like fresh out of grad school, not eating enough, training too much, and just came off birth control, lots of nutrient deficiencies. So I scaled way back on exercise. I focused more on sleep and stress management and like my nervous system regulation because that was all out of sorts. I was drinking way too much coffee, scaled that back too. And I think if I were to summarize the things that I did in that period, it was just to be more gentle on myself and really work on supportive strategies that regulated my nervous system versus trying to do all the things, working out, not getting much sleep, staying up and studying for school, restricting the food that I was eating. So it was like a complete 180 of the way I was living my life before. And I think the faster I went both feet into this approach, the faster my hormones started to improve. And one of the things that had lingered the longest in that transition period was that my progesterone stayed super, super low. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that I went on birth control like almost immediately after my first couple of cycles. And so it was really just a transition period of letting my brain and my ovaries get back in communication after nearly 10 years of not having an opportunity to communicate. So I like that you refer to it as a transition period versus a syndrome, because I think the word syndrome implies the body's doing something wrong. Really, it's just trying to, get back into its own rhythm.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's all the things happening for you. It was more than just birth control.
Yep.
And this is one of the things for us to wrap our head around in general as well. It would be easy to throw the pill under the bus and blame it for all of the things. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, there's the hormonal transition phase, which literally the ovaries are smaller. They're not putting out estrogen and progesterone at the same rate. And so they need to kind of recover. Mm-hmm. So there's that aspect of it. But then if you also were doing things that were not optimal, you didn't have the cycle to tell you. So you didn't have the short luteal or the spotting to tell you potentially that effect of the distance running and all of the things that you were mentioning. And so then you have to deal with both things at once. Mm-hmm. And so we can't always blame the pill for all of the things. We can blame it for a while. And then once we get past that transition, we have to start looking at what we're doing. So one question I thought of, hopefully this is the last one on this tangent, but this is really good. So we're just hanging out here. But you mentioned that you were a distance runner. Obviously, that would mean a lot of days of running for long periods of time, I'm guessing. Yep. And so you stopped the coffee and you said you started eating more. So did you just gain like 100 pounds?
I'm so glad you asked. There definitely was some weight gain that happened in that window of time of moving less and eating more. I definitely think that was necessary. And I think, we see this often in our clients too, when we go from this like very high stress, like high cortisol output state of really underfueled and just undernourished, and we stop living on those stress hormones. A lot of times there is some weight gain that happens because that's how our body cultivates a feeling of safety. It hasn't yet trusted us that this isn't just going to be a short-term energy supply. And it's like, well, we better batten down the hatches in case we go into another period of underfueling again. So there was it was not drastic. I think it was totally needed and part of the journey of what helped my body feel safe enough to ovulate consistently and healthfully again. But yeah, it did happen and it does happen. I want to make sure we normalize that.
And then just a clarifying question, looking back, do you think you were like a touch underweight or anything? Like, do you feel like you were going to your equilibrium point, or do you feel like you actually gained a little bit more than you were comfortable with?
Yes. I mean, if I was looking at my BMI charts, like I was trained to in school, I was totally within the realm of normal. But even looking back in pictures and just seeing like my skin tone, it was not a picture of health and radiance by any stretch. So I think I was still within the realm of what would be normal considering my height, even with the weight gain. But I think it was absolutely needed.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really helpful. And I'm really glad that that we went there, because these are the kinds of things, and you know this because you're in practice, these are the kinds of things that come up all the time. And I feel like this also leads us perfectly into the topic of burnout and healthy metabolism, because what I found, and I'll be curious to know if you've had a similar experience, is that when you're working with women who are having difficulties with their cycle and hormones, often it is related to something burnout related, metabolism related. So for example, the kind of category of exercising quite a bit, we want to maintain our good body size, we want to get into that bikini or whatever. But and not to make a joke of it, because it's not like I want to gain a whole bunch of weight either. So I'm in here with everybody else, So we want to maintain a good body size. So we're told that we need to eat less calories, that we need to exercise more. And that's basically what many of us, especially those of us who were growing up in like the 80s and 90s, like that was like the way that we could categorize the 80s and 90s by like calorie counting, because that was what was going on. So maybe this ties us into this topic, but let us know kind of what are some of the things that you are seeing in your practice related to burnout, like what's causing it. What are we doing to ourselves? And then what are how does that relate to the issues that we're seeing hormonally?
Yeah. So, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with anyone that grew up in the 80s and 90s. We came in with like fat, like literally fearing fat itself. There was a lot of like low fat, ditch the egg yolks, run from saturated fat type nutrition language in that time frame. And then just a lot of calorie counting and like the era of all the diets, really the commercial diets. And that's a big part of it, because when we're talking about burnout, we're really talking about a state in which like the nervous system is not supported. It's not able to cope with the demands of the day to day. And I think where we get caught up is we think about stress in some pretty limited terms. We think of, stress from our job, or maybe financial stress, or stress in our family life, stress in our relationships. But stress goes beyond that significantly to, if we're fueled enough, if we're getting enough sleep, if we have our circadian rhythm on track, like we're actually seeing the sun at some point during the day, if our gut health's intact, if our blood sugar is regulated. So there's all these other things contributing to what we like to explain with our clients, our stress bucket. And when that stress bucket overflows, we start to see things break down. And where women are unique is that our systems are very sensitive to changes in energy availability and changes in feeling of safety. And whether or not it is your goal to conceive at this moment or at any point in the future, having a healthy menstrual cycle and optimal fertility is, to quote you, a vital sign. That's how we know the body feels safe and the body is nourished. So if we have enough inputs into that stress bucket from our lifestyle, our nutrition, our mental health, then our body does not feel safe anymore. And a defense mechanism is going to be to shut off or at least interfere with the regularity of our ovulation. So now we see hormone production suffering. We see things like thyroid function suffering. We see abnormalities in how we handle stress and produce stress hormones in our blood sugar regulation. So the female body is exceptionally sensitive to changes in stressors. And I just think we have a complete mismatch between our culture and our society and expectations on people and our biology. And that leads to a breakdown in hormone health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really like the way that you described it. And so earlier you mentioned that for yourself, one of the shifts that you had to make was, and I'll see if I took a note, so we'll see, but it was the way you said it was really good, because you said something about food as manipulating your body versus supporting your health. Yep. So I know for myself, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, I learned about food as fuel. So I always had this idea that food was like gasoline and you just need to like eat it to like for energy. And I didn't learn about the importance of micronutrients for all of the different functions of the body and all of these things until later. So literally in my mind, it used to be just fill the bucket, eat the food so that you have energy. And that was it. So maybe share a little bit about how this shifted for you, but also how this is, because this is still an issue for many, many, many women, where we're thinking about food as calories in, calories out. Yeah. And as if weight loss is a math equation. So maybe, go into that a little bit and share what your experience has been.
For sure. Yeah. I think maybe things would be more simple if it all came down to a math equation, but that is not how the human body plays out. And I remember thinking food is fuel too. That was like a message that was pretty ingrained in me growing up and even in school. And I think even the process of learning about nutrition in a formal education setting, it was so like sciencey, it was like, these are carbs and these are proteins and these are fats. And it just took the nourishment out of food. It made it math and it made it abstract. And I was very disconnected from like a food quality standpoint or even a nutrient density standpoint, and just checking boxes of either calories or macronutrients. And we see this with our clients too. It's all part of this like unlearning of a lot of that indoctrination that we had growing up in the 80s and 90s. And viewing food as an opportunity to instill a feeling of safety and an opportunity to provide raw materials for hormone production. When we think about ovulation being the focal point of our cycle and the focal point of hormone production and fertility as a whole, there are so many micronutrients that are required for that to happen seamlessly and to support the health of all of our glands. And if we think about nutrition through that lens, we're like, okay, I need to be doing what I can to be getting the widest array of nutrients that I can in my food, and to be getting food that sends really strong safety signals to my body, instead of being, checking boxes from a calorie or a macronutrient standpoint. And that was like a huge light bulb moment for me, where I was like, oh, food is a lot more than just fuel. I'm literally not filling up my gas tank. I'm influencing the way my body functions. I'm even influencing the way my genes function. Like food is a truly powerful tool. And we go through that kind of process with our clients too, of understanding what it is and what it isn't, and how much power we have over our health and our hormones via the way we feed ourselves.
Well, so I have a question, and I'm just going to ask it because I wouldn't know if you've had this exact experience in your practice, but I think that there is a pretty significant percentage of people who, so correct me if I'm wrong, go to nutritionists specifically when they want to lose weight.
Mm-hmm. Totally right.
And so what happens for a woman whose goal is weight loss, but she also is planning to conceive?
Mm-hmm.
How do you manage that?
Yeah. So, we're big on expectations and boundaries set up front. So despite being a nutrition practice, we have a team of 3 women's health focused dietitians here that see all our clients. We actually don't specialize in weight loss. I refer those clients out to people that can do it better than we can, but it's not uncommon to have body composition goals and hormone health goals. And I think it's okay. We can have both. We can honor our body and also want to change it. I'm a firm believer in that. But the issue that we run into is that if we're looking for weight loss, that will usually require a period of like a deficit in terms of calories that we're taking in or energy that we're expending. And if we're looking at supporting fertility and optimal hormone health, we have to make sure that we're eating at least at maintenance, if not beyond that. So what we tell our clients is we can't do both right away. And our goal as practitioners is to be respectful of their metabolism and their hormones. So we will always start there. And that often means tabling for 3 to 6 months any weight loss goals until we can get their metabolism and can responsibly go through a fat loss phase. For others, that experience of just supporting their hormone health and their metabolism fundamentally either accomplishes the goals that they came in with anyways, or they realize that that's no longer of importance to them because what they were after is how they felt. And feeling good and vibrant in your life is really the metabolism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, your answer highlights the complexities of this. So for me, obviously, my skill set and practice has nothing to do with weight loss. Mm-hmm. That can be a thing that happens. Yeah. But it's never so my clients are coming to me for a different purpose typically. So that's never the center of my program. But to me, though, looking from the outside and seeing, from my experience and from my perspective, you can't weight loss can't be the primary goal if fertility is also the goal, because those things are mutually exclusive. There's no way so I want to hear your comment on this, but there's no scenario where you can restrict calories and have optimal hormones. Yep. So maybe tell us what, I want to hear your comment on that, but I also want to then go a little bit more into what we need to establish healthy metabolism. And maybe you can expand a little bit more on why those things can't work together.
Yeah. And that's absolutely my viewpoint on this too. We can't do those things at the same time because those goals are in opposition. We'll be spinning our wheels. And I do think people get stuck trying to do both things at once and not making any progress toward either of those goals. And it can be an expensive and miserable place to hang out. No fancy towel will overcome that if we're fundamentally under eating. So when we undereat, I always like to view this as a lack of safety for the body because that's how it is experienced by the body too. So we like to talk about it as consistent underfueling. The brain is registering this, okay, there's a shortage of energy coming in either because we're not eating enough or we're expending. And your brain is like, okay, I've got her back. Let me do some things to make sure she survives this. So the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to slow our metabolic rate by reducing thyroid hormone output. And that's smart if we think about it, because it's going to slow how quickly we burn through our energy so that we don't starve. We also are going to decrease hormone output, ovulation completely, depending on how long this period of energy availability issue persists. And again, it's a safety mechanism. She doesn't have enough energy to support herself, so we're not going to be able to support another life on top of this. And then we also have some influence on what's going on with our adrenals, which is the glands that produce our stress hormones. Generally, a really big increase in stress hormone production in response to insufficient energy because it's a fight or flight situation. Your body's trying to heighten its ability to find and gather food, and usually followed by a drop in that stress hormone production too. So we just have a slowing down of metabolism and a slowing down of hormone production when we're under eating. And that's why if we have goality, we cannot in any way be under eating. Otherwise, we start to down regulate the things that we're trying to improve upon. We just end up, like I mentioned, stuck spinning our wheels. So our very first thing for any client that we see working on hormone health goals across a lot of ranges is we have to make sure we're eating enough on a consistent basis. And I'm sure you see this too, accidental under eating. If it's just never been on your radar before, and we grew up with marketing that 1,200 calories is sufficient for an adult female, we got to spend some time checking in on that. So we start there 100% of the time.
Well, I'm glad you touched on that. I was going to mention that and ask about that as well, because it's one thing when a person is intentionally restricting calories for the purpose of weight loss, because they know that that's what they're doing, especially individuals who are counting their calories and tracking their food with the fitness apps and things like that, because they have this goal and the target and they're doing it and et cetera. But they know that they're under eating. What I find is that, and it's coming out more and more on the podcast, just because it's something that I see basically daily in my work behind the scenes, but many women do undereat, but it's not intentional. It's like you said, accidental. One of the things I always come back to is that when men train, they want to bulk up. And so stereotypically speaking, when men train and they're working out and exercising, they're typically eating more on purpose because of their goals. So their goals are a bit different. They want to build muscle mass and et cetera and whatever. Whereas for women, because the goal tends to be to lean up and to lose weight, it doesn't even occur to us to eat more. So bringing it back to, I feel like the distance runner example is a good one, because running in particular there's a lot of research about running. And I was recently looking at research on running and sperm health and excessive running. They defined it. I don't remember exactly. They had a category of ultra endurance runner, and they defined it. And it was a lot of running. It was many, many miles a day or many, many miles a week. But there's a specific category for running and the negative effect it can have on sperm. So maybe share with us then this link between, because you mentioned when you're in this category, it has an effect on thyroid function. It slows the metabolism. There's all these other things that happen. There's no way to achieve optimal hormone production without the adequate caloric intake. So maybe share with us kind of potentially short-term issues, but also long-term issues. What about clients who have been accidentally under eating based on maybe their workout schedule for years? Share with us how it can kind of the acute, but also how it can build up.
Yeah. And the distance running thing, if we're just looking at it as adding to that stress bucket, if we're logging some serious miles, again, how this is perceived by the body is probably something along the lines of, oh my gosh, she must be running from a lot of predators. This must be a high stress. I was always running, and it's an energy expense too. So there's that big need to compensate for the amount of activity you have with adequate nutrition. And you hit the nail on the head with the way men and women generally view nutrition around training. They're completely different goals. And I just ended up in a very calorie and nutrient depleted state from all of that training without a proper focus. So we are big fans of minimally effective doses of exercise, because we want the hormone health and blood sugar benefits of having good lean muscle mass, and metabolism benefits for that matter, without being too taxing on a nervous system. Because most of the women we serve, and probably a lot of them listening to your podcast, are in stress, burnt out category, especially humans existing in the world today. It's crazy right now. We got a lot of stress. So we don't want to be adding so much insult to injury with exercise. And I think a lot of people think of exercise as an outlet for that stress, but we have to remember that it in itself is a form of stress too. So I know you asked about short and long terms of this kind of situation. So short term, we generally are going to ramp up our stress hormone production in response to that heightened training. That's going to have effects on our hormones and our thyroid health. All of those things are very much connected in what's called the OAT axis, or ovaries, adrenals, and thyroid are always influencing one another. And then over time, as we have input of all of that stress, we have that slowing down of our metabolism, slowing down of our hormone production, slowing down of our stress hormone production. It's just that conservation mode that the body is going to go into long term. And that's a sluggish metabolism in and of itself. So low energy production, noticing that we have slowed hair, nail, skin. We might find that wounds take a long time to heal. We start to notice that body temperature is low. So that's where I think fertility awareness method is so great for the way that we can assess that or metabolism function too. So low basal body temperature. We might notice delayed or infrequent or maybe even absent ovulation. Digestion is in itself too. So we might tend more towards constipation. We're not having those daily bowel movements. We might be having some sleep issues. So long-term, it's just adding to that picture of burnout if we continue to keep a really, really high level of activity.
Just popping into today's episode to invite you to join my Fertility Awareness Mastery online self-study program. If you're looking for an informative and comprehensive DIY option for learning fertility awareness, I've got you covered. This program is the most comprehensive fertility awareness self-study program available. And the best part is you can learn at your own pace in your living room for a fraction of the cost of one of my live coaching programs. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/mastery for details. That's fertilityfriday.com/mastery. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. Well, and the word burnout is used a lot, obviously, and I think it's used when we're tired. And I feel like there's often emotional, it's kind of like what you said about stress. I find that there's a lot of emotional kind of things hooked up to it. So it's just like what you said, like when you think about stress, you think, I'm upset, I'm tired. You don't think about a happy wedding for your best friend where you're basically up for 3 nights in a row and running around, which it's a really happy event, but your body can respond in a stressful way. So share with us maybe your definition of burnout or how you would describe it, and how that might differ from how a person might use that word casually.
Yeah, I think it's really just a nervous system that's not regulated. So I know that probably doesn't generate how that feels in the person, but maybe I'll share that you might experience that in your body. It's feeling like your fuse is short. Like you do not have the resilience to deal with the stressors of day-to-day life. It's like something that wouldn't have been a big deal a couple months ago completely knocks you off your game and it take you days to recover from, like just really not feeling like yourself anymore. And I'm really glad you mentioned that even really fun thing add to that total burden of stressors in our day-to-day. And especially in a society that's so plugged into technology, like we're never off. It's like, you might not be working, but maybe you're checking your emails or your Instagram on your phone or getting exposed to the news at all hours of the day and night. And all this blue light is adding to the stress that we have too. So I think burnout is not existing as biology intended. We're like completely removed from the rhythms of nature. We're not even seeing the sun. We're looking at screens all the time. And it's just a nervous system that's not getting a chance to breathe. And I think burning the candle at both ends is a nice visual for burnout too. And it includes good stuff in our life as well. But we're not as women to be on 24/7. We're supposed to ebb and flow with different seasons and different cycles. And what we see in our clients and what I know to be true with myself is generally a disregard for the fact that we are cyclical beings and we need some off time.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment of burnout. I never really thought to define it, but I'm glad that we're talking about it. I think what I typically see, because my work is so menstrual cycle focused, is just certain patterns that aren't getting better. Yeah. And it's kind of what I call a low hormone profile, which would be kind of poor mucus production. Potentially the mucus signs and the temperature signs are not matching up at ovulation. And that tends to signify potential lag in progesterone. Not to say that you're not ovulating, but maybe it's taking a bit of time for that ovulation and the corpus luteum to form and the progesterone to be produced, which could be a sign of poor follicular development. So it's, I'm seeing these kind of real-time potential signs of it. And that one of the good things about this perspective of charting is that it doesn't mean your body is broken. It's a sign that something needs to change. And so that's something that can be hard for a lot of type A women, especially when they get into cycle charting, because they want it all to be perfect. But it's often that mirror. So similar to when you did your nutrient panel, it was this mirror of like, wow, this is different to what I thought it was going to be. But it didn't mean there was anything wrong with your body, but it did signify that it was time to make some changes. So often those are some of those signs. And so, I feel like there's a lot of good news here, though. The good news is that there's a lot of things we can do. So maybe share with us, you could take us through basic protocols or a few foundational things, but when you're working with a client who has those signs of burnout, so maybe even share what some of, so I'm always thinking about the cycle, but maybe share some of those signs that you see of burnout in a client, and what are some of those kind of tangible foundational things that we can all do to improve our hormonal health and metabolism?
Yeah, for sure. So we're looking at cycle data almost always with our clients here too, being in women's health. So we see everything that you mentioned. We especially like using basal body temperature and as a way to assess like nervous system state and metabolic state too. So we tend to see persistent low temperatures, even in the luteal phase. We can see complete lack of ovulation, optimal progesterone production. We'll see low hormone output if we have lab data on them too. It's that low hormone picture that you mentioned. We'll see suboptimal thyroid function. Again, maybe not clinically diagnosed, but not in an optimal range. And that's reflected in the basal body temperatures too. We see a lot of digestive complaints that reflect that over and down compensatory state the body gets into. So constipation, bloating, even like pathogens or imbalances in the gut as a result of things not moving through. We'll see sleep disturbances. That's usually my first tell if my nervous system is calling out for help, is I'm waking up in the middle of the night, like brain fully alert, ready to go to work. Mood stability, feeling like you have the resilience to deal with the stressors of life seems to go away as we edge more toward burnout, feeling like we're, got a short fuse. And then like physically, the hair, skin, nail lack of vibrance is a big thing too, noticing that either hair is lost or it's brittle and breaking. Same thing with our slow wound healing. If you get a paper cut, it's there for like 2 weeks, that kind of stuff. And what's cool about FAM and why we use this with all of our clients too, is that that's like free data in real time that we can get every day. And we do utilize lab testing in our practice where it's applicable, but I do think over a lot of really free, wonderful data we can collect on ourselves day to day. That's actually going to give us more insight than something that might be really expensive. So we do love that with our clients. And then if we've confirmed that this is indeed a burnout kind of hypo-metabolic state, the way that we work people through our protocol is we first start with making sure they're eating enough. So I know we spend time hitting home with that we can't improve fertility unless we are eating enough. So we start there. Then we work on our nutrient status. So one of the areas where we see people most depleted in that burnt out state is across their minerals. And if we're thinking about metabolism as the key to optimal hormones, our minerals are what are running our cellular metabolism. We literally can't generate or recognize ATP in the body without enough sodium, potassium, and magnesium. So we work on mineral status. So that might mean using some quality salt when we used to think that was something we needed to stay away from if we grew up in the 80s and 90s. It's adding in things like fresh fruit and root vegetables, things that actually have potassium that if we grew up in the low, we're staying clear of. It's adding magnesium back in, knowing that we're not getting as much from the soil anymore that we used to even 50 or 100 years ago. So we start adding in some minerals. We workshopped sleep. So we have to be getting good sleep and respecting our circadian rhythm to keep the nervous system soothed and well balanced. We're going to audit exercise that we're not burning the candle on both ends and adding insult to injury. So we love walking and weights as primary exercise modalities if we're dealing with burnout. And then we also have to talk about our mindset too. Like, are there tools that we can implement to help offset the stressors of day-to-day life? Are there a boatload of negative thoughts and getting ourselves in day to day? Where can we provide tools and resources to help somebody manage stressors? Because like we've talked about, we live in a pretty high stress society these days where we always have access to news and social media and just kind of keeping us in that fear response.
Mm-hmm. Well, and another question for you, I've certainly noticed changes that happen at different times of life. So what have you noticed in your practice? Is there a difference that you have seen in terms of resilience and how stress affects the body in younger women who are maybe in their 20s, early 30s versus women who are in their later 30s, early to mid 40s?
Yeah, I think overall we've been seeing just best picture in 100% of the clients we serve. So in our practice, it's primarily childbearing age. We don't typically serve menopausal clients or postmenopausal clients. So I can really only speak to that age group. But if I think back, in the 10 years of practice, it has been younger and younger clients with these like really stressed out, burnt out pictures that we used to see later in life, earlier and earlier. And it's been interesting to see that. And we work with a lot of fertility clients too. And I think maybe I'm a little biased because this is the world that I'm living in, but it feels like the rates of infertility have just increased exponentially. And the speed at which somebody is fertility treatment, where they've never really been worked up for just the basics that we've discussed, has increased as well. I mean, we have so many clients come to us that have had, been through IVF unsuccessfully several times, but nobody's looked at their thyroid or asked them how they're eating or how they're living their life. And I just think we have so much in our control with the way that we feed ourselves. And I think that gets overlooked.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and important observation. I have observed a trend. I think as we get older, there's a bit less resilience there. It becomes a little harder for us to make progesterone to the same degree as when we were 21.
Yeah.
But it's also an important observation that many women are struggling with some of these issues earlier, younger. And it could just be, it's a lot of things it could be. But I think at least part of it is the way that our modern world is. And it really, I don't think our bodies were designed to be on all the time.
No.
And even what you said about having time off, downtime. I mean, when it comes to the fitness goals, just the observations that I've made, because there's also one of the things that came out of the 80s and 90s. So at least someone who's listening will relate to this. I used to watch The Fashion File, I think it was.
Okay. Yep.
Remember that?
Yep.
That do. Yeah. So someone's going to relate to that. I remember, and I, being a young girl, was just all excited about all the models and stuff like that. And Tyra Banks was really big when I was young, and she's Black. And so that was really cool to see. And anyways, the point is that when I look back and think about what those models actually look like, women, we have fat deposits. We have fat on our thighs. We have fat on our bums. We have fat, on our breasts. Even if we're relatively small, we still have those hips and thighs and things like that. And especially as a Black woman, I have hips and thighs and a bum. And so I just remember having this period of time in my life where I would watch these models and kind of really, I distinctly remember when I started going through puberty and I started to see the fat deposits on my legs, being uncomfortable with that. It wasn't this big problem. They didn't end up amounting into this big problem, but it was there. And I was pole. So I was, just to put it out there, I was B-pole. And looking back at that, the amount of stress that it was then, now, I didn't grow up with social media. I didn't follow Instagram stars who are posting their workout pics every day and all this kind of stuff. So I feel like that can't be understated. That kind of adds to the stress of it. There's these very unrealistic expectations that many of us are affected by. And even if it's not that you end up being so severely affected by it, I think it gets in all of our heads. Yeah, I'd be curious if you wanted to speak about that, because there's all these different issues that would fall into the stress bucket, as you've termed it. A root of why so many of us are working out so much, not eating enough. It has to be related to this unrealistic expectation that we're supposed to be this skinny, as opposed to just being a woman and being healthy and strong, but not feeling that we have to meet this unrealistic expectation.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head with it's almost like resisting change in the female body at all costs. It's like you can never evolve beyond the prepubescent phase and body size, including even postpartum and the whole, you got to bounce back and that whole mentality too. And that is a generation that's super burnt out and super depleted because it went through the process of carrying and birthing and maybe even breastfeeding a baby. But I'm very thankful I did not grow up with social media, because that's no doubt part of this increased stress that women are carrying around, because we're just inundated with images of what we're told we're supposed to look like. And what is so much higher now that you're seeing literally pictures of you side by side with other people, not to mention how much of it is fake and edited, because there's that whole aspect as well. But I think there's just unrealistic expectations on women, on how you're supposed to look and how you're supposed to live. And again, ignoring our cyclical fact that in different seasons of life, this body is going to look different because it has the ability to carry life, and our hormones are ebbing and flowing throughout the month. We should look different in different seasons. And when we're looking at the isolation of social media, we're comparing ourselves to edited photos that never look different. And I think there's that underlying stress and feeling like we're not meeting that expectation.
Well, and this is where it's helpful to have hormone testing. And it's helpful from my perspective to chart the menstrual cycle, because I think for a lot of women, it helps them to start to see the connection between overall health. I hope that it helps women to shift their goals from the body image size thing to the what can make my cycles optimal and healthy and support my hormone health, because then we're shifting from how do I look to health. And And I mean, looking good is important. I'm not going to say it's not, but feeling good is more important. And especially for women who are wanting to conceive, shifting into what's healthy and what's optimal for hormone health. I think that that's necessary if you're wanting to achieve pregnancy without needing to go the artificial route. And again, and that's everyone's choice, but I know a lot of my clients, that's not their first choice. That's not what they're wanting to do. So I feel like we went like kind of full circle today. we covered a lot of different ground. Yeah. Given everything we've spoken about, as we are starting to wrap up here, what would you know, any final words of wisdom, anything that you would want the listeners to take away from our call today?
Yeah, I think really, and the thing that keeps me in the women's health space is just how amazing the female body is and how resilient it is and how it is always trying to get back to this place of homeostasis and balance. And that I would say, you know, having optimal hormone function and optimal fertility is the way to having a happy metabolism and being able to feel and function in our day-to-day lives and even look the way that we want to is hormone dependent. You know, when we've got plenty of our sex hormones around, like the way that a woman looks when she's got optimal hormone health is a completely different look than somebody that has a really suppressed hormone picture. And we can maintain a healthy body weight for us with a lot more ease when we have enough hormones around influencing. So I guess my last thoughts would be like, nothing is ever broken. And even this burnt out low hormone state that we've been talking about is nothing more than a defense mechanism. It's not something being broken. It's your body giving you signs that something needs some support. And we've got to adjust the way that we're nourishing and living. And there's so much that's within our control. And I think it's common to feel like outside of ourselves for things to be fixed, but it comes down to the individual learning about her cycle, learning how to have awareness of where she is, and learning how to respect the signs that we need to fuel and live differently. And with that, I mean, you are unstoppable. You can feel incredible and optimize your fertility. And I think that's amazing.
Oh, I love that. I feel like one thing that is also useful for women who've been listening this whole time is just a little bit of reassurance around eating. You know, even if you have a history of the restricting food and exercising, things like that, all I would want you to take away from it is it is possible to get to homeostasis where you don't have to be stressed about the weight. There may be, as you mentioned, that initial stage where your body has to get into balance. And so that might, in some cases, result in some weight gain. But I think that that's a big fear that I've seen a lot. I feel like maybe if years are themed, I feel like the last 2 years of my practice, I've seen a little bit more of that, a lot more of that, I guess I would say. And none of the things that we're saying are like, and then you're going to gain 50 pounds and you know what I mean? And it's like, it's really a homeostasis so that you're really happy with your body and your size, but you're also balanced hormones. Like it's possible to have both things happen at the same, like, I don't want to say at the same time, meaning like you're working toward those goals at the same time, but I mean, it is possible to be at a really good body size that you're happy with and also have optimal hormones and not to have to feel like you always have to obsess about your weight.
Yes. Amen.
Had to say that. Well, so where can the listeners go to learn more about you, what you do? Tell us all the places, the socials, all the things.
Sure. Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. It's at Kaely RD. My name is spelled very strange. It's KaelyRD. And my website's the same. So those are really the two places that I'd look. I do most of my educating on Instagram. And then if you're looking at working with me, all that info on our website.
Awesome. Well, this has been such a treat, such a great conversation. So thank you for being on the show today. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks so much for having me and for the work that you do. Just so much respect for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/457. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Kaely. It was such a great opportunity to talk about something that affects such a significant percentage of my client base, and also something that, though it may not seem like it does, can have and does have such a significant impact on your cycle and your hormones. And often those are the kinds of changes that really bring about the big results when you're looking to improve your hormones versus what you may think will do it, which is kind of filling your cabinet full of a whole bunch of interesting supplements. It's really these types of foundational shifts that are at the heart of maintaining hormonal balance and hormonal health. And I think one point comes to mind as I think about my takeaways from today's episode, which is that it's not to say that weight loss in and of itself is not a good goal and doesn't have immense health benefits for many women. I think that there are certainly times when weight loss would be overall an important part of maintaining a healthy body, healthy size, and healthy hormones. I think the point is that there's certain things that you may not be able to do at the same time as that. Weight loss is a goal in and of itself. And during that time of energy deficiency, your hormones will not actually be optimally balanced. If you're tracking your cycle while actively working on a weight loss plan, you will potentially see the effects of that, whether it's in the luteal phase, different things that happen in the luteal phase, whether it's shortening or you're seeing spotting or having an increase in PMS symptoms, or whether you're seeing changes in ovulation, disruptions in mucus production, whatever the case may be. And so I think the key takeaway is that weight loss and hormone balancing or optimizing fertility or trying to conceive are often things that would have to be done in tandem, not at the same time, basically. I think if you're focusing on weight loss, focus on weight loss for a period of time. And then when you're ready to change that focus and start trying to conceive or start balancing hormones or start focusing on a variety of different health conditions, I think that makes sense. But from that standpoint of the menstrual cycle, you can see for yourself that those goals don't really work that well together at the same time. And so hopefully that's the takeaway. And also just the concept of kind of inadvertent weight loss or inadvertent under eating, I should say, and how it can affect your cycle. So the importance of getting enough to eat to support overall hormone health cannot be understated. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.